Welcome to the Full Frame Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Walter. India is the fourth largest carbon emitter after China, the United States, and the European Union, and has set a target of net zero emissions by 2070. How's the nation of nearly 1.5 million people driving climate action? Arunabha Ghosh is the head of one of Asia's leading climate think tanks, the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, based in New Delhi. He served as a special envoy for South Asia to the UN Climate Change Conference known as COP. This episode is called Building Environmental Bridges.
Full Frame.
When we think about COP, we think about the big players like the US, China, India. Each one has their own issues that they have to deal with, but there are always big players at these gatherings. Describe the situation with climate change in India today. How would you define it?
Well, Mike, India is already one of the world's most vulnerable countries when it comes to climate change. It's impacting us in various different ways. I call it a combination of the acute stresses and the chronic stresses. At an acute end, we see a rise in what I call hydrometeorological disasters. So floods, droughts, cyclones, storm surges, sometimes a combination of all of these in the same, within a single year in the same region. So my organization, CEW, we're developing the first high-resolution climate resilience atlas for India. And we've identified that three quarters of our 700-odd districts are already hotspots for extreme climate events. What does that actually mean? It means that lives are vulnerable and livelihoods are vulnerable. Take, for example, rains. I've just come from India. Our rainy season has begun. About 70% of all rainfall in India falls within a 3-month cycle in the summer rains. But we are noticing that over 60% of our sub-districts, we have more than 4,500 sub-districts, more than 60% of those sub-districts are seeing an increase in the intensity of rainfall. So while overall rain is good for a hot, arid country, but if it comes in shorter bursts, in a quick duration, then it basically overwhelms the urban infrastructure, but it can also be bad for agriculture. At the same time, on the flip side, there's heat stress. So more than about 57% of our districts are now facing extreme heat stress. That means, your productivity of labor goes down when you're working outdoors. Your crop yields might go down. So these are all ways in which we are facing the crisis as we speak.
As a broadcast journalist, one night I might talk about a monsoon hitting India. The next night I might talk about a drought somewhere else.
Yes.
The next night I might be talking about fires in Greece. The next night I might be talking about Texas and the floods there. It's a news story each night, but it's actually a narrative, isn't it? It's a different chapter in the story about climate change.
Well, the narrative is actually a change in, or what we think is instability in your ambient environment. When you think about the farmer, right, they're not looking at climate science. They're looking at received wisdom, decades of patterns of weather. You are then using satellite data, SMS messaging, etc., to decide what crops to plant when. And still, year on year, the past is no longer the predictor of the future. So this instability and variability in your ambient environment makes it very difficult to build resilience. At the same time, it's these communities on the ground, whether it's a farming community, a fishing community on the coast, a small town whose bridges get inundated and washed away, they're also demonstrating huge amounts of resilience. So it's an in India, everything is in contrast. So you see this massive impact of climate change, and you also see communities fighting back, local administrations fighting back. So the question is, how do you build in the systems and the processes to make sure that that resilience really sticks?
It was interesting. I saw you accepting your award when you won the Asia Game Changer Award, and you said about the Council on Energy, Environment, and Water that you've been able to create markets where none existed. So describe for me this journey. What did India look like then? What does it look like now? How much progress have we seen?
Well, in some ways, there's been a lot of progress, and it's been exciting to be part of that journey. And when I founded the Council on Energy, Environment, and Water in 2010, exactly 15 years ago, we had less than 20 megawatts of solar. In that same year, India launched its national solar mission. Today, India now has over 100,000 megawatts of solar. It's the world's fourth largest country in terms of deployed capacity of renewables. Just last week, India crossed 50% of its entire electricity capacity coming from non-fossil sources. That was a target India had set for itself for 2030. We've achieved it 5 years ahead. So it's really exciting to, as you said, and as I said a few years ago, creating those markets where they don't exist and demonstrating that you can achieve things at scale with speed, but on the back of clear market principles. You take something that seems extremely expensive, and then you have reverse auctions and use the competitive forces of the market to bring down the prices to now about 2.5 US cents a kilowatt hour. Similarly, a huge progress on energy access. When the UN Sustainable Development Goals were announced in 2015, India had the largest number of human beings without access to electricity. And then between 2017 and 2019, 130 million people got access to electricity on a nationwide drive. That's basically about 11,000 people getting a wire into their homes every hour over an 18-month period. The world as a whole has 700 million people still without any electricity. To get them access to electricity by 2030, every hour, 11,500 human beings have to be electrified. So you get a sense of the scale at which these things are moving. And at the same time, we have to keep doing more and faster. We've got to still build out hundreds of gigawatts of clean energy capacity as we build out an economy, which is the world's fastest growing major economy. So you need the energy to fuel that growth.
Listening to you talk about what's been accomplished in 15 years, it's remarkable. And yet we feel like when we hear the climate story, it doesn't matter how many success stories we hear like this. You look at it and you're like, is there hope? I mean, and obviously you wouldn't go to work each day unless you felt there was hope, but it does seem so daunting. Why is it that basically the narrative is, oh my God, it's this oncoming train. What do we do? And how do we change it to where it's more of a positive conversation like you're having?
Well, I think the negative or the positive or the hope or the despair has to be still grounded in evidence. And I think it's important not to let our biases, wherever we come from, cloud that judgment. Now, where do we look for in terms of evidence? The first is, where is energy demand going to come from? Nearly 90% of additional electricity demand across the world will come from developing countries and emerging markets. Now you look at it and you wonder, will those markets have dirty energy or clean energy? And across the world, you look at Vietnam in Southeast Asia, you look at Namibia in Sub-Saharan Africa, you look at Uruguay in South America, you look at India in South Asia, and you see emerging markets are leapfrogging to a cleaner energy system. They are not waiting to build out. They do have dirty energy capacity, but they are not, every incremental new capacity is largely coming from clean energy sources. That's number one. The second thing is that this has to be linked to people's lives and livelihoods. It can't be, the energy transition can't be something that's just imposed top down. So we draw a lot of hope from the evidence we see on how livelihoods can be enabled. I'll give you an example. In rural India, using distributed energy for livelihood activities, say on-farm or off-farm food processing, milk chilling, small textiles units, if you put it all together, that's potentially a $50 billion market. And that's not pocket change at all, right? So you begin to see that even at the proverbial bottom of the pyramid, there is a huge scale and huge potential of what's possible. The third thing then is the jobs angle associated with this. We estimate about 3.5 million jobs by 2030 alone from the clean energy story. So when you begin to put these pieces together, you see that the energy transition story, the economic growth story, and the job story can actually be brought together in a jobs growth and sustainability mantra, not as an ideology, but something that you can actually create with some deliberate policy and market intervention.
So the climate change conversation should become an economic conversation in some respects, because I think for the longest time, that's been the fears, like this is going to mess with my economy, right? Is that basically changing the conversation, moving in that direction?
I think it is. I mean, it's always been an economic conversation, except, as you rightly said, for at least 2.5, 3 decades since the UNFCCC, the UN Convention on Climate Change, was signed in the early 90s, many countries across the world instinctively thought that this would be bad for the economy. And there's been growing realization over the last decade, I would say, that this can also be good for the economy. In terms of where technology is headed, where new investment is going. Last year, India invested about $50 billion in various aspects of the energy transition. China has deployed more clean energy infrastructure than the rest of the world combined last year. So when you see that these fast-growing economies are investing in still an emerging sector, you have to ask yourselves, why are they doing this if it weren't making sense for the economy? The other aspect of this is that the nature of what economic growth is itself is evolving. In one state in India, we did some analysis, Odisha, it's often impacted by storm surges and cyclones in the east of the country. And we found that one state alone, the green economy, is a $42 billion investment opportunity and can create 1 million jobs in that state alone. So the narrative is now shifting from environment versus the economy to sustainability as a driver of a new form of economic development.
The reason I want to ask about empathy, and I'm going to leave it here, I just stepped into a session over there. This woman was talking about dehumanizing, that people get so angry on this issue, especially here in the United States. But she said, we've got to stop dehumanizing. We've got to be we-humanizing. We've got to understand the other people and connect with them and try and find common ground. Otherwise, we're always going to be stuck in this cycle. And I want to get your thoughts on that, because I thought it was a really good point. It's easy to dehumanize. They're wrong. I'm right. It's much harder to do what you're describing.
It's not just that we think we are right. We think the information on which we have based our decisions is the only information that matters. So let me give you a quick story. About a decade ago, I was in rural India, in a forest in southern India, and I came across this landless farm laborer, who had a thatched roof hut in the middle of the forest, but he had a solar panel on his roof. And I asked him, at that time, that one solar panel cost $400 in the exchange rate that we had at the time. I asked him, how have you managed to afford this when you're literally dirt poor? And he said, before solar, I was using kerosene for lighting. That was making my 2 white shirts dirty. So I was spending 50 rupees a month, at that time $1, on detergent powder. After solar, my shirts are relatively more clean, so I'm spending 20 rupees a month on detergent powder. Now, I don't know that farm laborer, political views, I don't know who he votes for, He was a widower. He had 2 young daughters. One was in nursing school. One was a high school student heading out to the city. But what I saw was something I've never seen since. No banker in Mumbai, in London, on Wall Street has ever come up with an investment plan for clean energy based on detergent powder savings. But that's empathy there and then. If you don't listen to their lived reality and watch and live their lived realities in some ways, we can't come up with the answers we are searching.
Clean energy. There it is. Thank you so much. We're going to end it there.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you.
That was my conversation with Arunabha Ghosh, founder and CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment, and Water. That's it for this Full Frame podcast. Our thanks to my colleagues, Jolie Lee and Jan Surjanan, here in our CGTN studios. And if you want to watch the full-length, full-frame show, please go to CGTN Now on Apple TV. I'm Mike Walter. Thanks for listening.